Thank you, Jeff. Okay. Good morning. Well, you all sound really sleepy this morning. Let's try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is supposed to be an energized morning. It's beautiful sun out there, snow on the ground. We're going to walk you through the first section that I'm going to review with you now is why we even create a CEDS. And CEDS is Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. That's what those four letters stand for. And this is required to achieve economic eligibility for grants from the EDA, the Economic Development Administration in Washington. But more importantly, organizations like USDA, EPA, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Transportation, and others are now looking towards CEDS, or regions that have CEDS in place, to place a priority on who's ready to receive grants. And many of these federal agencies are now joining together to put housing, environment, transportation, and economic development into one grant structure, and then use a competitive grant process among all those agencies to select 20 regions of the country to get access to combined funds because of the reduction in availability of funds. So having a CEDS in place is getting more and more important in terms of, and when you look at the huge damage you all have had from hurricanes and flooding and fires, the need for infrastructure here is significant. And a small state like Vermont with a small region like Windham cannot possibly afford to raise all that money themselves. That's why we have one of the reasons we have a federal government that partners with local government. So one of the principal reasons for this is to make sure that we are also connecting local planning efforts to regional strategies. There are a lot of planning efforts that go on in regions where they're not always connected to economic development strategies. You know, we have the Windham Regional Commission that's heavily involved in this process with CEDS, as well as other organizations. So we're trying to tie workforce, we're trying to integrate all those efforts together into one common economic plan. Okay, now, we were here in January working with the CEDS board and the expanded CEDS committee to look at why you all wanted to do a CEDS. And a number of the area focus points that they brought up are right here. First of all, they wanted to use it to provide more clarity to the CEDS strategies. They wanted to use it to educate the community to become more engaged. And we have been asked to make sure that this CEDS is going to be done according to the best practices for the development of comprehensive economic development strategies. And one of the reasons for that is that too many CEDS documents in this country sit on shelves. And they're not fully integrated into the planning process of a community, and the community doesn't own those strategies because they didn't help do it. The reason we have 60-some people that have signed up to be here this morning is because we're trying to encourage broad-based involvement. And later on, around 11:10, I will show you what the next steps are going to be that will continue that engagement in 4 different regions of the Windham region, 4 different sections, to bring people to the table to gain their involvement. So we're looking for input. You need to build and galvanize public support for economic development, a comprehensive strategy like this. If the local towns do not understand their role with each other and with the county and the region as a whole, what do you think the likelihood is they're going to oppose a strategy that comes out of this process? See that happen anytime? Okay? Happens in communities all over this country. One of the things that Vital Economy is known for across the country is building public engagement and building local ownership of strategies so that a CEDS group that's trying to implement those strategies on your behalf has broad-based support at the town level and the community level. Does that make sense? Okay, so your involvement here is strategic. It's not just to sign off on a checklist at EDA that says we have public involvement. We actually are looking for you to work actively in this process. You'll also notice that the CEDS board and the CEDS committee is more private sector than public sector. That's because that's where the jobs get created. There's also a significant nonprofit sector involved with this effort because there's a significant amount of jobs in the nonprofit sector in this region. So this is to increase the public and private sector networking to achieve opportunity. As we go down here, you'll see at the bottom here, providing a planning mechanism for a post-Vermont Yankee community, a post-VY world. Okay? The reality is something's going to happen there, and at the ultimate point that VY is no longer around, there are a significant amount of very high-value jobs that will not be here. The economic impact of not having those jobs is going to be significant. So you can either choose to be a victim, or you can choose to define your strategy before it happens, so that you have a way to replace those jobs with significant high-value knowledge worker jobs in the community. So those are the reasons why the CEDS has chosen to do this CEDS strategy. We're going to use what's called a smart CEDS process. How many of you are familiar with what are called SMART goals? Have you ever heard of them? Oh, good. We have a few in the room. Vital Economy is one of the few economic development organizations in the country that actually uses the SMART goal setting process. And the reason is Vital Economy is composed of largely private sector executives who got into this business as a social enterprise to bring best business practices to economic development, as opposed to just building a consulting company. We're in the knowledge transfer business. So the SMART CEDS process says that we will have specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based goals. And if we go back to the goal slide that Jeff pointed out, you'll notice that when this was set up years ago, a couple years ago, these were goals set for 2017, working off a baseline and trying to create a percentage of change that gets you to $430 million worth of regional increased GDP, $96 million of increased regional wages. Does that sound like a nice thing to have in the region? Anybody that doesn't want that? Okay. And by the way, when Jeff talked about not having to memorize this, we actually have a theory about this. We're working on a project in Central Illinois right now called Focus Forward CI. Take a look at it sometime, focusforwardci.com. Everybody there, we have over 1,000 people involved, they carry a pocket card with them. And if they're at a cocktail party and they want to know what Focus Forward CI is about and they can't remember, they pull the pocket card out and says, this is what we're about. Okay? That's how much we want you to own the strategy that is here. Okay, so let me go back a little further here, back to where we were. Okay, so we were on SMART goals. Okay, and the way in which we implement a SMART CEDS process is we base it on best practices, and for whatever reason, the EDA and the National Association of Development Organizations identified, who knows how, our organization as the best practice organization in the nation with regard to performance metrics and comprehensive economic development strategies. So whether you like it or not, we are going to push you towards a best practice based on the fact that you use best practices around regional comprehensive economic development, and there are actually 10 ways to measure whether you're effective on doing regional economic development, and there's 8 best practice metrics around regional collaboration. And we are actually going to ask a group of community leaders to do an evaluation of your region on those 10 points and those 8 points during this process. Not today, but during this process. The process will be regionally focused, not just town by town. It will be asset-based, and asset-based approaches, only about 10% of economic development strategies in this country are asset-based. Many are needs-based. Asset-based approach means we're going to find and identify with your help the most unique indigenous assets of the region, which have already been identified by CEDS committee over the last couple of years. You will have the opportunity to add to that. And what we're going to do is build an economic strategy around the assets that are unique to you. Not me-tooing some other community based on assets they have that you don't have, but really valuing what you have that's unique. And that is not just a physical asset. They can be knowledge assets, they can be cultural assets, they can be geographic assets, they can be weather assets. If you happen to have unique microclimates that meet some interesting. The fourth thing we're going to make sure is that your economic strategy is diversified. How many of you have a retirement plan? How many of you in that retirement plan invest everything in one stock? Okay, we treat economic development strategies like 401k plans. Okay, we want you to have a diversified economic development portfolio, so you're not as risk prone. Okay, we want it measurable, and we really believe in discipline and consistency, and making sure. One of the reasons you have benchmarks and metrics is to make sure you have a way to measure and set priorities. Those goals, your job over the next 4 or 5 months is going to determine, are these the goals we still have? Are these the measurable objectives we have in terms of growth and development? Do we need to modify those? Because this becomes the filter that says, how many times you had 100 projects come before you? Everybody has an idea for a project. Is every idea equal? If you have no way to measure an idea in terms of your region, then everything's an opportunity, right? Okay? Well, one of the purposes of goal setting is to say, does the idea help us meet our goals? That's the first test. That's why you have defined goals. And by doing that, it gives you a way to prioritize. Doesn't mean it isn't a good idea, but what it does mean is it may not be an idea to get you to the goals you're trying to achieve right now. Could be worth a while later. Okay, so I want to spend just a few minutes on the whole concept of prosperity, because this is a critical component to understanding how this process is going to be delivered in this region. There is only one way to increase prosperity in this country. And prosperity is all about wealth retention and wealth creation. Retaining wealth in a region or creating wealth in a region. And productivity is the only way to move towards increased prosperity. If you're in the agricultural world, in the 1890s, 30% of the labor force in this country was employed in agriculture, and we fed the country. Today, less than 3% of our workforce is in agriculture, and we feed the world. The only way that happened was through productivity, okay? And industry after industry after industry, you've seen that. And there's only 3 ways that you increase productivity. Either through innovations in education, innovations in technology, and innovation in organizations. Sorry for that slipping off the slide there. We'll have to adjust that. Just happened to notice that. Okay, and I'm going to give you a very quick example. You all are here from New England. Remember those old mills that made all kinds of fabrics? They used to have remember how long those buildings were? Still around. They had the big drive shaft in them. They had belts that were attached to those drive shafts that connected to looms. What happened to the factory when one belt got worn and broke? Did only that loom close down, or did the whole factory close down? Whole factory. What happened in the late 1890s, early 1900s, was the invention of the small electric motor. Okay? That small electric motor was attached to the loom, and guess what? No longer needed to be attached to the drive shaft. What that then created was the need for a whole change in the way work took place, and the first high school funded by public money was launched in 1910 in Indiana, and it was on property owned by a manufacturing plant. And all the kids in the high school were trained to go into the workforce in that plant. Okay? So high school was the major new invention as a public entity for, in the world of education, that was linked to this new technology called the small electric motor. And that also drove piecework compensation. Because now every loom could be independent and they could be independently productive depending on who the individual was at the loom. Okay? And that then drove an innovation in new organization. Can anybody think about what the new organizational concept was that came about as a result of that? Yes? Nope, not labor unions. It was bureaucracy. That awful word, it was actually a new invention of management and organization. So I'm hoping that example in terms of how technology, change in education, change in organizational structure changes the way we function as a community. Today, we are largely organized in our governments, largely organized in our communities according to a vertical hierarchy that we call bureaucracy. Yet we live in a globally connected flat world, which means we are all operating in these individual towns as if a vertical hierarchy still works in a world that's been dramatically changed by technology. Okay? So if you feel like you're frustrated or feel like you're a victim, it's largely because in most communities we have not figured out what are the changes in education, organizational structure that have been impacted or being impacted by innovation for us to restructure the way we function. Does that make sense? So one of the roles of your CEDS process is to actually help you figure out how you come together as a broader region in a different way to organize, okay, in order to take advantage of that. So, and if we do all that, notice this, what do you notice about this little pie-shaped circle here? All the pieces aren't connected, are they? Okay? That's a problem. Think we have a problem of town by town not really being connected to one another and not really moving on the same path? Okay? Or even this sector, the sustainable community over here versus VY over here versus manufacturing or arts and culture, and is there any connection between all these pieces of the economy? In the world of vital economy, when you do a smart CEDS, you build through collaboration critical mass that creates a climate of unlimited economic opportunity. And guess what? The pieces of the pie are connected and you have what? A bigger economy. Okay, so the idea here is that through collaboration, through sharing of resources, and through reinventing the way you manage your economy, you grow a bigger economy, all of which you all can participate in and have a more viable existence and a more prosperous existence. Make sense? So that's what we're about. And so, thoughts or questions about this? Challenges? Yes, ma'am.
Didn't you just explain part of the process is that education used to be a funnel to job markets?
Yep.
It no longer is. We disconnect. We don't educate our children or educate children to enter job markets that have here. In more cases, that's why many of them leave, because we don't actually help them work into jobs that are already in our community. Whether we develop some new ones or not, we don't look at it that way. We separated that goal, which is explain how high school started.
Right. Well, one of the reasons workforce CEDS has been very focused on integrating workforce development into economic strategy is looking at the role of education and training as part of creating that workforce. Because it used to be that workers followed jobs. Now jobs follow workers. Because workers are largely knowledge workers and they can choose to be anywhere they want. And they will only be, and we'll talk about this a little later, they'll only be in those places that supply the kind of environment that keeps them learning, that provides them with the quality of life that their families want, and also supports trailing spouses and all this kind of stuff, so that we have so education is not just high school. It's a lifelong world now. And what we prepare people, young people for, starting in K through 12, needs to be rethought in terms of what it's all about. And we all need to think about what the role of education is. Thomas Jefferson said that a strong democracy is dependent on an enlightened citizenry, and that the job of education is to produce good and productive citizens. He didn't say bureaucratic citizens. He didn't say agricultural citizens. He didn't say industrial citizens. He said good and productive. And over time, good should stay the same, although I'm not sure anymore, and productive changes. How we are productive, depending on technology, depending on innovations in education, depending on innovations in organizational structure, changes over time. And our problem in America is we have not changed, largely community by community. That's why in many cases we're struggling with the economy, especially in smaller communities like this. So our job here with the CEDS process is to get our heads around where we need to be. Yes?
I'm Doug Fox from the Arts Council of Wyndham County.
Yes.
It seems to me that our larger goal here is improvement in quality of life for Wyndham County. And that quality of life, that there are two sides of the equation. One is how much do people make and how affordable is it to live and to work in Wyndham County. In the world of energy, I think it's becoming clear that it's much more efficient, much more cost-effective to reduce consumption through efficiency than it is to add additional capacity. In this process, how much of the focus will be not on increasing income, but in reducing cost of living? That is, finding ways that as a community, as a county, we can live more efficiently, we can live better with less. How does that fit into the CEDS process?
Productivity is all about, if you think about the cost of getting any industry, whether it's the raw material, whether it's planting corn in the ground and having a cereal box over here purchased by a consumer, or whether it's producing energy and having it consumed by the consumer, there's a value chain in there. And there's a whole bunch of transactions that happen. And the whole goal in our process of vital economy is to shrink that value chain. Okay, so you get closer to the consumer. So productivity is all about taking the waste out of the system. So decreasing energy costs is certainly something that makes sense. But what I will tell you is that unless you are increasing wages, unless you are increasing earned income, you are not improving quality of life. And we can see that all across this region. We're seeing, and Mark will show you some of the statistics, the only growth in income in households in this region is from non-earned income. That's it. Wages have been stagnant and declining for years. And even with the increase in entrepreneurship, in sole proprietorships, dramatic increase, yet we're seeing a decline in wages. So the actual living wage that is being produced out of those entrepreneurial opportunities is not enough to support a family with children. So what we need to figure out is that balance. And so what you're talking about, whether you're from the Arts Council or whether you're looking at renewable energy, you're looking at, there needs to be a close connection between the environment, between energy, between arts and culture, between economic growth. All those things have to be part of the process. Okay? Does that answer your question? Okay. We're running about 7 minutes behind, so I am going to turn this over to Mark.